Hi, you're listening to What's the Deal, our investment banking series here on JP Morgan's Making Sense podcast. I'm your host, Dania Chehab, a managing director in EMEA Healthcare at JP Morgan. We recently hosted our second European Healthcare Symposium, which focused on new frontiers in healthcare innovation, from technology advancements to financing trends and new innovation economies. Today, we're discussing the key takeaways from the event and the overall trends in the healthcare sector with Mike Gaito, Global Head of Healthcare Investment Banking at JP Morgan. Mike previously joined our podcast discussing the insights from JP Morgan's annual healthcare conference. Mike, welcome back. Great to have you.
Thanks, Dania. Really happy to be back on the podcast.
So, Mike, to kick things off, what were the key highlights and takeaways from this year's European Healthcare Symposium, and how is it different versus the global conference?
Sure. Well, it's a really exciting evolution of our healthcare franchise. Everyone knows the January healthcare conference that we've had for many years since my old firm, Hambrecht & Quist, started that back in the 1980s. And that is a gathering of almost the entire industry globally. And it reminds us each year how much more global the healthcare industry feels like it's getting. So we wanted to extend that franchise, and we think about other geographies where healthcare is important and healthcare is growing. So the European Symposium is a great extension of that conference franchise. And we really try to use it to help focus on the next generations of innovator companies in Europe, because we do think that both the strategic players as well as investors are focusing more globally and more outside of the US to find innovation.
That's really great to hear. Can you walk us through how this year's conference compared to last year's?
For the conference this year, it was exciting to see we had almost double the attendance, up over 300 participants. We had dozens of investor meetings, which was a new innovation for this year's conference. And we saw wonderful collaboration among European innovators, global investors, and global healthcare leaders.
Thanks, Mike. We kicked off the symposium with your opening remarks. You mentioned the importance of the equity capital markets driving the healthcare ecosystem. Can you elaborate on the current state of the equity capital markets, particularly in Europe?
So coming out of the pandemic, where it felt like every investor was a healthcare investor in some ways, we are in a different environment. I would say the availability of capital and cost of capital is globally somewhat lower than that very heightened moment for all of us, but we're still in a very positive place. And I would say there's a growing recognition, as I opened with, among investors and strategics about innovation globally. And Europe is really one of those areas where the quality of science and the quality of innovation has always been high, but it feels it's getting more attention these days from US investors who may feel that US is a bit more crowded than US biotech and US biopharma, medtech, tools and diagnostics, all of our sectors where innovation is paramount. In terms of Europe specifically, it feels like we're getting more US investor focus, which is leading to more European companies pursuing initial public offerings, which is great to see. We also have just in general a rebound globally of the biopharma spaces and the life science tools, diagnostics and pharma services spaces, which is really nice to see because there are huge pockets of innovation in those areas. And we're getting some early signs of that rebound in medtech as well, with some IPO work that we're doing with some younger innovative companies in the medtech space globally. Right now, the availability of capital is there. The markets are relatively strong. We're seeing a little bit of volatility in aftermarket performance. So that's putting a little bit of a brake on the IPO market broadly. But it does feel like we're in a robust environment where investors are looking for innovation, looking for new companies to put money into. And frankly, the global venture fundraising is quite strong, which does help build out that next group of innovators that want to come to the public markets.
So Europe continues to be at the forefront of innovation across the various subsectors, with a number of European biotechs, for instance, right, looking to raise capital in the US. And it sounds like the availability of capital is starting to come back. When we shift gears from the ECM to the M&A markets, M&A transactions are on the rise. How is the healthcare sector performing in terms of M&A, and what specific subsectors are driving this activity?
Yes, healthcare M&A is quite healthy. We're really driven right now by, again, the innovative side, and a big part of what our European Healthcare Symposium focused on. The pharmas are looking to biotech increasingly for innovation in a lot of therapeutic categories that weren't focused on by biotech historically. We're also seeing it in tools, diagnostics, and pharma services, where we see the impact of technology changing a lot of those product offerings, as well as in the pharma services space, where manufacturing has become such a big global issue and focus, not only for some of the big diabetes and obesity players, but also to support a number of new modalities, new ways to deliver care in terms of the drug side. So lots of consolidation, lots of chasing of innovation, and of course, lots of focus on building top line growth long term as pharmas go through patent cliffs and need to build up a revenue growth. Same in the other spaces, large med tech companies looking to consolidate the rest of the innovative companies as they get to a mature steady state revenue line, or sometimes even before. And tools and diagnostics companies always looking for that next wellspring of revenue upside through innovation and through new product opportunities.
That's really great to hear. So as you say, M&A, where the healthcare industry is really majoring on acquiring new innovative modalities, be it on the biopharma side of things, or being able to cater to these new modalities through the manufacturing, as we have seen with the GLP-1s and others, which have driven quite a bit of the activity in the space. Now, when we think about all of these innovation in the healthcare industry, what impact do you see these innovations have on the industry and the various subsectors?
Innovation will always be a lifeblood of the healthcare industry. And when I think about new modalities, I think about cell therapy, gene editing on the biopharma side, really changing the face of a lot of the way we deliver healthcare. We also see it on the diagnostics side, where technology, AI, and machine learning are just making diagnostics easier to deliver, smarter, more consistent. So it's really a fascinating world that we live in. And we've talked about how exciting the innovation cycle is in healthcare broadly for a long time, but it really does feel like a moment where all of the big consolidators, all of the big players are looking to the smaller innovators to take that next jump in terms of their revenue growth rate, to chase some of the leaders, or as the leaders to continue their leadership position from a growth perspective, because there's so much funding flowing into our space broadly that's really fueling these opportunities that we find through scientific leaps that feel like they're being made very consistently. And that even goes into the pharma services space, where on the manufacturing side, we're getting increasing yields and manufacturing techniques and new innovations on that front. Even in the services space, where through machine learning and AI, digging through data on outcomes, on use of therapeutics, on use of treatments, where we're improving patient outcomes and patient lives. So there's just a ton of really interesting evolutionary and revolutionary leaps that feels like are being made across the healthcare ecosystem.
Your revolutionary and evolutionary comment is spot on. Now, let's shift to another market dynamic that will likely have an impact on the healthcare sector: global elections. Over half of the global population live in countries that are holding nationwide elections this year. What impact do you see from these upcoming election cycles on the healthcare industry in EMEA, but also globally?
No matter how much data we dredge over time, it's really hard to say there's anything but mixed results you see around election cycles globally. So it's something that we continue to monitor. But the best advice we can give our clients is going into an election cycle, there's a lot of activity that we see, people trying to get ahead of election, whether that's financing or M&A. We also see right after the election, maybe you can stare at the data and see slightly better market reaction coming out of an election. And sometimes we have a slightly better market environment post an election. But again, very mixed and always goes along what else is going on in the world, geopolitically, economically, et cetera. In healthcare, especially in the US, increasingly in Europe and elsewhere, we do think about the cost of healthcare being a hot button topic coming out of elections and going into elections. So it's something we always monitor carefully and can frankly provide a little unwanted volatility into the markets as you have healthcare regulation and healthcare reformation be a topic among candidates and among parties globally. So really, it's something we try to help our clients navigate successfully, but each election holds different outcomes and really hard to predict exactly how markets will react.
And looking ahead, what are the key trends and opportunities that investors should look out for in the healthcare sector for the rest of 2024 and looking into 2025?
From a cost of capital perspective, I think that will be one interesting trend. We see private equity having been on the sidelines for a while now with the relatively high cost of capital compared to historic levels. That seems to be thawing somewhat, and it's heartening to see many of the private equity investors, and important to say that private equity in healthcare has really globalized, and European private equity investors are playing a very large role in the healthcare ecosystem alongside of the historically large and strong US-based private equity players. So expect to see more LBO activity, more potential financing activity coming out of the private equity sector and private equity controlled companies, a lot of those in the healthcare services space and across many of the other verticals. As I touched on, technology is bleeding into every part of healthcare, whether that's simply just sort of data management, data analytics, the learning of models for anything from drug discovery to diagnostic development. We feel like we're on the cusp of some amazing leaps forward, and everyone's sort of just watching to see where AI and where machine learning will make the biggest impacts. And as I talked about, they're obviously already making tons of impacts on the data heavy and analytic heavy side of the industry in healthcare services with provision of care, but also into the diagnostic space as well. And hope to see that make even more inroads in drug discovery, drug development. Last thing, the regulatory environment still seems quite strong globally. We've got an industry that works generally well with our regulators, and it feels like a positive cycle from that perspective, getting new treatments, getting new innovations in all sides of the healthcare ecosystem into the sort of workflow and into helping patients in whatever way we can. So feels like a really great environment. It's really exciting to see the continued globalization and the continued respect and focus for innovation across the globe. And we were really thankful to be able to shine such a bright light on that through our symposium this year.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Mike. To recap, today we discussed the key takeaways from our recent European Healthcare Symposium, exploring innovations in healthcare, the changing landscape of fundraising, M&A activity, and more. Big thanks to Mike Gaito for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another What's the Deal episode. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'm your host, Dania Chehab. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to What's the Deal? If you've enjoyed this conversation, we hope you'll review, rate, and subscribe to JP Morgan's Making Sense to stay on top of the latest industry news and trends. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. To stay ahead of the curve, sign up for JP Morgan's In Context newsletter, packed full of market views and expert insights delivered straight to you. To subscribe, just visit jpmorgan.com/in-context. This material was prepared by the investment banking group of JP Morgan Securities LLC and not the firm's research department. It is for informational purposes only and is not intended as an offer or solicitation for the purchase, sale, or tender of any financial instrument.